This is an introduction to library research, where you're going to learn how to find information through the library's resources for any paper, project, or other venture that you have. My name is Ann Dyer, and I'm the Research and Instruction Librarian at Maine Maritime Academy. My job includes both teaching students and faculty how to use our resources, as well as assisting with all of your questions about finding resources or using the library one-on-one or online. As you watch this information, you may have questions. Even more likely, you'll have lots of questions as you get started on your research. Please contact me for help. I'm available by email, phone, through our online chat on the library website, at the library's service desk, and by appointment. We'll be working through 5 sections in this lesson. We'll talk about the different types of sources you can use, how to evaluate the sources you find, setting up your research topic and question, search strategies, or how to turn your question into an actual search for information, and then a live demonstration of searching library resources and how to use them. First, we have the different types of sources. There are many different types of sources that you could use in your work. You'll make your choices about which ones are the most helpful based on what your question is. To get the ideas flowing, some types include books, magazines, newspapers, videos, people, websites, and journals. You may or may not be familiar with journals, so let's go into that a little bit more. There are 2 types: trade journals, which are publications for a particular industry like shipping, or academic journals, which are publications in a particular academic specialty like engineering or history. Here we're going to talk about the academic or scholarly journals, which include many scholarly articles in each publication. In a way, they can look very much like magazines, though usually they're less flashy, have fewer pictures, and often don't have glossy pages. Each academic journal has a number of articles in it, each one by a different person or team of people. The articles may all be within the same discipline, like engineering, but will be on different topics depending on what research they're reporting on. Many articles are written specifically to report on the results of an individual's or team's research, while others might be looking at many research studies that have been conducted, and is reporting on what new things we can learn by taking all of these studies into account. These are for an academic or scholarly audience, like other researchers or professors. Many academic journals use a process called peer review, which we'll learn about in a moment. The publication process for each article that gets included in a journal is fairly lengthy due to that peer review process. It typically takes many months or potentially multiple years to go from writing the article to having it appear in the published journal. So let's look at that peer review process. This is the process that many articles go through to get published in an academic journal. First, we have our researcher. She just completed a research study and learned some interesting things that she'd like to share with other researchers and people who study the same subject. To do that, she writes a paper with what her experiment was, how it went, what the results were. She submits the article to the editor of an academic journal, who takes a look to see if her work falls within the interests of the journal. If it does, he hands the article to a team of other experts in the field to review. This is where we get the name, peer review. These peers in the subject are also researchers and professors, and they evaluate the paper to determine if it's new and original information that hasn't been published before, if the experiment was sound and well designed, if the write-up meets their standards to ensure that other researchers could replicate the study to determine if they get the same results. You might notice that this is an important part of the scientific method. Can others do the same thing and get the same results? Can they adjust the experiment slightly and learn new things? If the paper does meet all of these criteria, they will likely return it to the author for some additional edits or changes. This is very common in the process, as it's almost impossible to meet every standard of a publication on the first try. The author can then make the changes, resubmit the paper to ensure it now meets their standards, and if it does, It gets published in the academic journal. It can then be read by people who subscribe to the journal. So now we have a bunch of different journals that all go through this process or something similar. How do we get access to them? We use library databases, which subscribe to many journals at once and then take them apart digitally so we can search for individual articles rather than having to flip through each issue of each journal. The database will help to categorize articles by their subject matter, note who wrote them and what their title is, and all of this will make it easy for us to search very specifically for articles that meet our research needs. All of these articles from all of these journals are then fed into the database. The library subscribes to many different databases, thereby giving you access to searching all of them. It's important to note that these subscriptions we have are included for you as an enrolled student. They're available to students, faculty, and staff, and other visitors on campus, but not to other people who aren't affiliated with the institution. This is because it follows an economic model that has a few paywalls along the way. Let's follow that money briefly to see where it goes. Institutions like universities or other research institutions pay researchers to conduct research. They then submit articles to journals which publish their material. Databases then subscribe to journals, and libraries subscribe to those databases. The articles have a significant monetary value, and we make sure to jump that hurdle on your behalf as students. So if you ever find an article online that's asking you to pay for it, know that we are in charge of getting that access for you. You should never have to pay money for an article. We can help you find it through our services, borrow it from another library for you, or help you find other information that meets your needs. All of this is to say that information, especially good information, has a real value. We're here to make sure that you have access to it. When you find academic or scholarly articles, you'll notice that they follow a pretty standard format, though it can be adjusted depending on the journal or the subject matter. Most scholarly articles start with an abstract, which is essentially a summary or quick report of what the article is about. Read this first, as it will give you a very good sense of whether the article is worth reading. It will then go into an introduction about the subject and what they're studying. Many will include a literature review, which is a review of what's already been written on the subject. This is a great way to find other sources on your topic. The methods and results go into the nitty-gritty of the experiment or research that was conducted. It tends to include a lot of statistical analysis and will be the most challenging part to understand. I recommend saving this portion until after you've read the other sections, as you'll be better prepared to understand it at that point. The discussion and conclusion talk about their findings from the research, discuss what went well and what could be improved, and makes recommendations for the next steps or further research. Very importantly, the end of the paper includes all the sources that the authors used to write the paper. If this paper is helpful, you'll likely find many other helpful papers in the references section. You'll recognize the references section as very similar to your own references or works cited section at the end of every paper that you write. Let's take a look at what all of this looks like in one scholarly article. Here's an example of a research article that you might be using in your research. It has all of the standard sections to it, but I thought it might be helpful for you to see what those would actually look like in an article. So here we start with the title of the article at the top. You can even see above it there's some more information about who the author is, the title of the journal, the volume, date, how many pages it is, as well as a standard link so that you would be able to return. It's listed as a research article rather than as a response or other kind of article, and then gives the title. Below that, you see the authors, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth author, so this had 5 people working on it. And the little numbers in superscript next to each name indicate which institutions they're associated with. It's generally a good practice for people to understand where these people are working, helps them contact those people, and is also a source of pride for those institutions. There's a recommendation of who you should speak with if you have questions or comments about the article. And here's a really helpful tidbit. It shows you when the article was initially received, when it was accepted for publication, and then when it was actually published. So you can see this article actually had a fairly quick turnaround. It was received on the 19th of September 2018. It was accepted for publication on the 15th of November 2018, and it was finally published on the 26th of February 2019. So initially submitted in September and published in February. The editor for this is also listed so you know who was working on it, and you can see what year the copyright belongs to. This initial block of text is the abstract. That's often not labeled, but it is before the introduction, and it gives you a good idea of what the article is about. Next, we have the introduction, giving some information about the subject that we're learning about. And then the second section is the methodology. Here it's called modeling and method. There are likely going to be some equations or mathematical formulae here if you're reading a math or science article. Some diagrams. These do have pictures, but they tend to be technical ones and only as needed. And a lot more math. This is a part that you'll probably want to read after you've read the other parts of the article because it is so dense. You can see this lasts for several pages, so it is very thorough. There are titles below each of the figures so that you have a little context for how to read them. And then we finally reach section 3, the results and discussions. Sometimes results and discussion are separate sections, sometimes they're put together. It really depends on the format of that particular journal and what the subject material is. This is a section that will give you information about what actually happened during the experiment, what they learned, and how they analyzed the data. So again, you can see a lot of those charts and graphs. Those are the results of their experiment. Some more calculations and formulae. Again, this can be a little dense. The results tend to be denser than the discussion, so if they have split those two up, then you might read the discussion first. And then we get into a summary. That's sometimes called a conclusion. And that leads us basically to the end of the article. You can see that they do note whether there are any conflicts of interest. That's whether they have a stake in this in some way outside of academia, whether they have invested in a company or something of that nature. There might be some acknowledgments because research does take quite a lot of work of teams as well as funding from different institutions. And then there's the really helpful references section. So if this turned out to be an article that was really helpful for you, you would be able to look at those references and probably find some other material that's also really helpful. This is what I like to call citation dredging. You can see they've used just a huge number of sources, and you would be able to go look at those and make sure that you agree with the conclusions that they drew from them, and also just learn more information. And that leads us to the end of this article. Most of our articles through databases do include a copyright notice as the final page, just to make sure that the copyright is clear and that you don't sell or redistribute the article in a way that is not allowed for. Let's take a look at how we evaluate those sources we're working with. What makes them good for our use? How do we tell when they're not the sources we're looking for? So there are all of these sources that we mentioned earlier, including books, articles, websites, videos, and more. How do you figure out which one might be what you need for a particular question? You want to consider 3 main things. 1, the scope of the article, or how broad the information is. If you're writing a short paper or giving a general overview of a subject, you'll likely want a fairly broad article that also gives general information about the subject. If you're writing a more specific paper and asking a very specific question, you may want sources that are also narrower in scope and look at a small aspect of the larger subject. 2. The depth of the article is often related to its scope. The narrower the scope of information, the more in-depth the authors can get about that information. The broader the scope of the article, the shallower it will need to be about any particular aspect of that subject. 3. The third aspect is how long it takes to publish within that particular format. The time going through the thought of the author to writing the information to publishing it will determine how current or recent the information is. If you're writing about the Roman Empire, it might be fine to use a form that takes a while to publish, because the information we have probably isn't changing rapidly. Conversely, if you're writing about a new form of treatment for a disease, you'll need to use sources that are quicker to publish so it can be more current. That said, there will be times that you need a source that was quick to publish on a more historical source, but you find it very useful. Similarly, a source with a lengthier publication timeline might give you a great overview of a subject, even though you're also going to need more recent sources for recent developments. Here are a few examples of matching sources to your information needs. Books are relatively long, so they may have a lot of information on a subject within them. They could be narrow or broad, depending on the author's intention in writing the book and who it's intended for. It usually takes several years to publish a book. Magazine articles are often pretty narrow in scope because they're relatively short pieces. It can take only days to get a magazine article published, so many of them are very topical to current events. Others might be more historical pieces. This will be determined by what the magazine is and what it's trying to accomplish. Websites can post information extremely quickly, sometimes within minutes of news breaking or someone having a thought. Their scope and depth is entirely dependent on what the website is. Journal articles typically have a very narrow scope, go into great depth about the subject, and can be between months and years to be published. One way that we can think about whether a source meets our needs is how it ended up where it did. Information in the physical world might be printed. That means that it's been written and exists in a physical medium, like a piece of paper. This is different, but not exclusive, from being published. A published work is something that had to go through a process, probably being edited and vetted by people other than the author. Published works may well be in printed form, but the important aspect of them is that they went through that publication process. A printed text may or may not have been published, so we would want to determine what process it went through to end up on that page. Information might be physically printed in a journal, but it could also be physically printed from someone's home printer. That's the physical form of the information. However, scholarly articles go through a peer review process. Books that go through publishing companies are similarly edited, vetted, and ultimately published. The same is not true for someone producing a newsletter from their home as an individual. They may have printed their articles, but the articles did not go through a rigorous publication process. Taking this to the digital world, we can think of this as websites that post material versus ones that publish the material. Anything that ends up on a website has been posted in some way, but we want to know that it went through a process. Someone other than the author read it, edited it, and vetted the quality of the information. As you can see on this slide, that's sometimes the difference between a blog post and a news article. But there are lots of examples of this. It could be a video produced by an individual and posted to YouTube, versus an organization that produced a video and vetted it for quality before posting it to YouTube. Information that's printed or posted isn't necessarily bad information, but it does require that you take on more of the burden of determining whether this information is high quality, and it's less likely to be reliable without those processes in place. Consider where the source lives. A source that's on the open web is something that you might find by doing a Google search, and there's often no fee associated with it. Newspapers and journals may be available on the open web, but they do have a fee associated with them often. A Google search can be a great way to find information, but you're going to find a lot of information, and you may find it's like sorting through a huge pile of things. Some of them will be great, but a lot of them will be very low quality and of no value to you. Google's results are arranged by what other people find helpful based on your search, so you may be getting what's popular rather than what's relevant or high quality. Library databases give you free access to paid content like newspapers, trade and scholarly journals, and more. They have a layer of review, as everything had to go through a publication process. There will also be much more original research from scholars, as well as in-depth information. Consider who the information is for. An article for a popular audience is one that's written for people who aren't experts in the field. They may be reading the article just to learn about something they're not familiar with yet because they're interested, or just for fun. To determine if a source is for a popular audience, ask, would the general public read it? Is it interesting to a wide range of people? Can you read it if you're not an expert? Is it general and not detailed? Information for a scholarly audience will be different. You can ask, is it for experts to read? Is it intended to share new and original research or studies? Is it highly specific and detailed? Once you know who the audience is, you'll have a better idea of whether it's a source that's appropriate for your use. There's one test or checklist you can conduct on nearly any source you use, and it will be instructive on its suitability for your use. The criteria are the currency of the source, or how current the material is. You may be fine with or even want an older source, but you'll want to be aware of whether the age works for the subject that you're studying. The second criteria is the relevance of the source to your research question. Sometimes it will be relevant to the whole question, but sometimes it will be relevant to only one aspect of your question. Then you'll need to find additional sources that speak to the other aspects and draw your own conclusion in your paper or project. Next, the authority of the source is who wrote it. What credentials do they have? Can you trust them? What makes them a trustworthy source? Next, accuracy is about how factually correct the information is. Check their sources and verify that their conclusions follow directly from the evidence and that they use sound logic. Finally, ask what the purpose of the source is. Why did they write it? Everyone will have some purpose for creating the information, so don't think that the purpose inherently biases the author too much. But ask, are they trying to get my money or my vote? Are they sharing their work so others can benefit? Why do they want me to believe them? What do they want me to do with this information? Considering their intended audience of the source will help you in determining the purpose of the writing. Then try to ensure that your purpose in reading the source lines up with their purpose in writing it. Academic sources work very well in this case if your purpose is to learn what the current research is, and their purpose is to share their most recent research with you. The final method for evaluating a source is to make sure that you're looking both within a source and learning about the publication, as well as across other sources and from other authors on the same subject. These are called vertical and horizontal reading. While you want to evaluate a source on its own merits, it's also helpful to know what others are saying about the subject, as well as about the source you're using. Look at how the subject has changed over time. What do we know now that we didn't used to know? Now that you've considered the scope, depth, and publication time, and you've learned about distinguishing material that's posted or printed from material that's been published. You've learned to consider the intended audience of the source and how to apply the CRAP test. And finally, you've considered evaluating sources both within the source and by looking to external sources to learn more. With all of that available to you, you'll be able to comprehensively evaluate whether a source is suitable for your information needs. Now it's time to set up your research. The first thing you should do is create a question from your topic. While a topic is what your research is about, a question will provide you with a firm direction for your search. Think of it this way. The thesis of your paper is the answer to your research question. So if you know your question, you'll have a much easier time of doing research and determining your answer. As an example, the topic might be a history of athletic shoes. When you turn that into a question, you might ask, how did the current basketball shoe develop from previous types of athletic shoes? You can see that the question provides a lot more direction and would make a more directed paper or presentation. A general history might be interesting, but it would be hard to know where to start or what type of structure to have. The question helps with all of that and lets you get more in-depth within the topic. The question should be interesting to you and your audience. Information should exist on all aspects. There might not be anything written about every aspect in a single source, but you'll be able to find information to the different aspects from different sources. The question hasn't been answered yet. That's what you're setting out to do. Narrow enough that you can answer it. A very broad question might be too big to answer in a paper or project for class. This likely isn't a dissertation or book that you're writing, but something shorter and more manageable. Broad enough that there's enough to talk about. If your question is too narrow, you'll have trouble finding enough to say on it. For example, you might need to move it from being broader to narrower, or vice versa, once you get into the research and see what's available. You might also need to shift your question slightly to the side. It might be the right narrowness, but you'll need to focus on a slightly different aspect of it based on what you're learning. All of this is okay, and definitely to be expected. Researchers are having to adjust their questions all the time. The trick is to start researching and reading early enough that you have time for this process to work as it's supposed to. If you wait too late, it'll be hard to have the wiggle room you need to make adjustments. Let's take a look at an example of variations on a question to see what they might look like. First, what are the neurological effects of Snapchat use on children ages 8 to 12? Do you think there would be a lot of good information on this question? Second, what are the social and emotional effects of social media use on children and adolescents? What about this one? Would you be able to research it effectively? Finally, what is the effect of social media on people? Is this one that you would expect to find good information on? The first question is very narrow. It's looking at only one type of effect, only one type of social media, and a narrow band of ages. I think this one would be too narrow to research unless you're actually setting up your own experiment and creating that information. The second question broadens the types of effects. It allows for any social media, and it also broadens the age range. I think this one would have enough information, but it still guides our search enough to find useful information. I think this one is the right level of narrow enough and broad enough. The third question is looking at any effect, any type of social media, and the entire population. I think this one would be too broad. It's a very broad question and may not help us target the search enough. All of this is still hypothetical. I might get into my research and find that actually the third question is the only one that's broad enough to find information. I might also find that there's so much in-depth research on this topic that I really need to go with the first question in order to get through the information. I can adjust as I go, but it's helpful to think in these terms so you'll know what direction you need to head when you run into difficulty. Now that you have your question, you know what types of sources are out there and how to evaluate them. We can consider how we'll set up our search. So here's the question we're working with. What are the social and emotional effects of social media use on children and adolescents? I've highlighted the words that carry the real meaning of the question. They are social, emotional, social media, children, and adolescents. You should do the same with your research question. Consider what words are carrying the meaning. These will be the words we use to create our search. But I can guarantee that the words you've selected are not the only words that you could use to search. There are synonyms that others might be using to talk about the same topic. There are also broader and narrower words. By taking a little time to consider what words other people might be using, we can set up a search that will incorporate all of those sources. The goal is that we want to search for each concept, not each vocabulary word. Let's take a look. Here we have our words. I've batched a few of them because I think they help us understand the concepts we're looking for. We have social and emotional, social media, and children and adolescents. From there, let's think of some words that are broader and some that are narrower for each of our concepts. Here we have our words. Social and emotional might mean health generally, or perhaps the culture we're in. More specifically, we might be talking about mental health, bullying, or friendship. You'll see that some of these are slightly different in their meaning, not just broader and narrower. That's okay. We're trying to get at the overall concept. When we do our search, we'll be relying on computers that may not understand that the phrase mental health is similar enough to our search to include it in the results, and we could miss out on that source even if it's really helpful. Social media could be about the internet generally, or it might be a specific platform. Children and adolescents could be as broad as people generally, or it might mean babies. As a synonym, we could use kids or young people. This is what an advanced search looks like in most of the library's databases. It has 3 search bars by default, and more can be added if we need. It also has a box in between each search bar, and that gives us the option to select the word and or the word or. But don't worry, there's a method to all of this. We're going to use one search bar for each concept we have. Each concept will have its own bar. We'll have one to talk about social and emotional effects, one about social media, and one about children and adolescents. Now, about those and or words. These are what we call Booleans, and you can think of them as a Venn diagram. Using the word or means that either concept can appear in each result we get. In fact, both concepts could appear, but either one can. Using the word and means that both concepts must appear in every search result. There's even a third word that we can use, not. That means that we could include a word that may not appear in any search result. That's a little confusing, so let's take an example. Here we have one circle for people who like cats but don't like dogs. They live in that circle on the left. Then on the right, we have a circle for people who like dogs but not cats. In the middle, we have people who like both cats and dogs. So our circles on the left and right are our or. We can search for people who like cats or who like dogs, and we'll include all of those people who like one or the other. We'll even include people who like both because they like at least one of them. Or helps us broaden our search by allowing for any of these people to show up in our search results. If we use and, we're limiting ourselves to that middle portion. We only want to find people who like cats and dogs. In this instance, we might also use not. That's people who like birds. Maybe they like cats, maybe they like dogs, but they also like birds, and we do not want to include them in our results. Therefore, we can use not to exclude anyone who likes birds. Here, we're searching for people who like cats and dogs, but definitely not birds. We'll only find people in that middle section who like both cats and dogs, but not birds. Here we're looking for people who like cats, or who like dogs, or both, but definitely not birds. And here they are, everyone who falls into those circles, including the middle section. We continue to exclude people who like birds. Let's now look at these words to set up our search. Same search bars, new search terms. I'm using the top bar to search for the concept of social or emotional, and I've included all of those synonyms that we thought of. I put or in between each one of them, so any one of them can appear. I've put and between concepts, so all concepts must appear in every search result, though any vocabulary word within each concept can appear. The second bar is searching for social media, and it could use the phrase social media, or it can use the other social media words. The third search bar is for children, but any of those words to describe this age group can work for getting us to that concept. You don't have to use and in between the concepts and or between the words, but this is a method that I recommend for making your search as broad as possible to get at your concepts, but narrow enough to find relevant materials that talk about all of your concepts. You'll definitely need to adjust your search as you go. You might need to remove a concept from one search and look for that information separately. You might need to use or between concepts to get enough results. You might find that some vocabulary words are just not getting you good results and decide not to use that one at all. So here's another search for the same information. This time, I'm looking at the negative effects specifically in a few social media platforms, and I'm looking at adolescents who are more middle school age. This is one way to adjust your search. I'm really asking the question, what are the harmful effects of TikTok and Instagram on middle schoolers? That's a much more specific question than my overall research question, but it might help me get at information in a little different way. Here are two more sets of examples. In one set of searches, I can look at positive outcomes of social media generally, negative outcomes from social media, and then any outcome from social media. In the next set of searches, I can look at outcomes from Facebook, then outcomes from Instagram, and then outcomes from TikTok. I may do all 6 of these searches in order to answer my original question about the effects of social media. What we're doing is using accuracy and precision to our advantage. Accuracy is hitting the bullseye, while precision is getting to the same spot every time. So if I get the bullseye every time, I'm both accurate and precise. If I'm near the bullseye, but not super consistent, I'm accurate, but not precise. If I'm off to the side consistently, I'm precise, but not accurate. And if I'm just all over the place, I'm neither accurate nor precise. In a way, we're trying to use the first 3 in order to get the information we need, but try some different approaches to make sure that we're really getting all of the helpful information we can. If our search is too narrow and precise, we'll miss some material that's a little out of left field but still has helpful information within it that's relevant to us. By using those booleans, and, or, and not, and a good set of vocabulary words, we can use the diversity of our topic to our advantage, while making sure we're getting to the core of what we really need. We'll try to avoid being neither accurate nor precise, as that makes it very hard to sift through the results to find the one good source in there. There are many ways to find resources using the library's subscriptions to databases. I'm going to show you where to find a few of the most common databases and demonstrate some of the basic functionality in them. To get more in-depth instruction on these databases, check out some of our other videos. To find a database, click A to Z Databases under the Resources heading on the library homepage. This brings you to a list of all of our databases. You can view the most common databases in the list on the right. Select from the alphabetical list by clicking a letter at the top of the page, or by selecting a subject. We recommend certain databases for certain subjects, so this can help you narrow down your options based on your research. Let's look at one of our most comprehensive general academic databases, Academic Search Complete. You can find information from many subjects in this database. It is owned by the company EBSCO, and you will find that the interface of most EBSCO databases looks just like this one, so you can apply what you see here to other searches. Now that I'm in Academic Search Complete, I'm actually going to go from a basic search to an advanced search. The search bar works fine in the basic search, but by going to advanced search, we just have a lot more options immediately at our fingertips. As you can see, there are the three search bars, just as we were learning about earlier. There are the Booleans. There are limiters and expanders, such as looking for only peer-reviewed articles, only a particular publication type, dates of potential publication, and more. I'm going to start with one of our searches. So here you can see that my search is one for social media or Facebook, and health, and adolescence. So I'm looking for all three of these concepts, and I've added one of our synonyms to expand the search a little bit. Then I click search. Up at the top, we see that we have over 1,300 results from that search, so that is quite a lot. And I can still use the limiters and expanders to the left-hand side here. In particular, I might want to limit the publication date to sometime after 2007, just to make sure that it's something that is really relevant. That eliminates a few articles, although not all that many. And here I can click the title of the article to get into the record of that article. You can see who the authors are, where it came from, some of the terms that define what this is about, and very helpful, the abstract. So that's how we know if this is something that's going to be relevant to us, is by reading that abstract and seeing what it has to say. This article has the HTML full text right in this record, so that's very helpful. I can use some of these features to listen to the article or to switch between the different parts of the article itself. I can cite the article. If I want to return to the article later, I'll select permalink and use this link to get back to the article later. The URL bar will not continue to work because that is a search-specific bar. This one will continue to work. And if I want the PDF full text as opposed to the HTML, I can click right there, and it will bring us to the full text of this article. So there we are. That's a basic search using Academic Search Complete. Now let's look at the database Academic OneFile, which is a similar database, this time owned by Gale. Again, most Gale databases will look very similar to this one, so you will recognize this interface as you continue researching. In Gale Academic OneFile, we'll have some pretty similar functionality. I'm again going to go to the Advanced Search. Again, we have our three search bars, our Booleans, and some more options to limit or expand our search. I'm going to do the same search in this database. You might have noticed that I've put quotation marks around the words social media. That's a way to search for a couple words as a phrase rather than as individual words. Otherwise, it would be looking for social or media, but not social media, so we would get very different results. I'm again going to limit the publication dates to being something after the year 2007, just to keep us relevant to our topic. And I'll click search. This looks a little bit different than the EBSCO search. Up at the top, you can see that it's not including everything in our search results. It's actually splitting out the different kinds of sources. So here we have academic journals are the ones currently being displayed. There are 115 of them. There are 10 magazines, 178 news articles, and 1 video. So in order to see the magazines, I would need to click that specifically. Otherwise, we'll only see the academic journals, which may be what we want, but we want to make sure we're not accidentally missing out on some other good content. Very similarly, I can click the title of this article and it will bring me into the record of that article. It has information about the authors, the publication date, where it came from, who published it, and more. Again, I can cite it, I can download it or print it, and I can get the link for it if I'd like to return at a later time. This provides the full text in HTML. It's highlighted the words that are words that I searched for, And again, I can change font size, listen to the article, or other things from those features. In order to get the PDF full text like I had in the EBSCO database, I would click Download, which would download the article for my use later. And when I open that up, I can see that we have that full formatting. This may be especially helpful if there are charts or diagrams in the article that you'd like to use. Those do not always show up in the HTML full text. You've now seen two of our most useful databases from the two providers who are most frequently represented in our collection. Now I want to introduce you to the search bar C-Search on our library homepage. This search bar is not a database itself, but instead a way to search many databases simultaneously. You'll be searching Academic Search Complete, Academic OneFile, and many other databases all at once. It does not provide as precise results as searching one database at a time, because it's working across many ways of organizing information, but it is a way to get started and see what information might be out there. You can enter a basic keyword, title, or author search directly from the homepage. However, I'm going to click Advanced Search. You can now see that this search is an EBSCO search, so it looks very much like Academic Search Complete. Here are our three search bars, our Booleans, and our limiters and expanders. Now that you've seen a sample search in both Academic Search Complete by EBSCO and Academic OneFile by Gale, we can take a look at C-Search. Here I go into the advanced search. So let's do the same search that we've done the past couple times. It looks like we have about 1,000 results more by using C-Search than we did using Academic Search Complete, and quite a few more than we had using Academic OneFile. In part, this is because we have many more kinds of sources that will be included. Again, I'm going to limit the dates just so that we're comparing the right things. That takes a few things off the table, but not many. And here I can also take a look and even limit by what databases we're getting. So 777 of these results are from Academic Search Complete, and 361 of them are from Gale Academic OneFile. You can see that there are quite a few others from some of the other databases we have access to. You're also going to have more types of sources. By looking at all of these, you can see that there are academic journals, newspapers, magazines, reports, and more. But there may even be physical books in this collection, because this includes our access to our library catalog, which shows physical items that we hold in the library. Just like we found in the previous databases, I can click on the title, and that will bring me into a record of the article. I can learn about many different things about the article. I can read the abstract, and on the top left, I can access the HTML full text or the PDF full text. So with that, we've finished our agenda. We've looked at the types of sources you can use, how to evaluate them, how to set up your research, and setting up strategies for your search. Finally, we took a look at 3 different ways to search some of our databases that will give you some relevant and different results depending on which ones you choose. So at this point, thank you, and please do contact me with any questions that you have about this information generally or about your project or paper in particular. I'm happy to help you with any step in this research process, and feel free to contact me by phone, email, chat, or just by stopping by the library.